Most hunters spend their entire lives dreaming of clearing the 10th floor. Kim Gong-ja did it as an F-rank hunter that nobody had ever heard of. But clearing the floor wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was what came next. Because the moment the tower recognized him, every powerful person in Babylon turned their eyes toward the mysterious hunter only known as the Death King. For a quick recap, last episode, Gongja's life changed forever. After awakening the S plus skill, I want to become just like you, he discovered that it could copy one random skill from the person who killed him. At first, it sounded like a cruel joke. A skill that only activated after dying wasn't exactly useful. Everything changed when the future Flame Emperor killed him. Instead of copying an ordinary skill, Gongja inherited the Flame Emperor's greatest secret, an X rank skill that rewound time by 24 hours every time he died. He spent more than 4,000 deaths traveling back 11 years into the past. Then, before the future Flame Emperor could ever awaken his legendary power, Gongja hunted him down and killed him. The man who was destined to become history's greatest monster never got the chance. And by clearing the 10th floor, Kim Gong-ja earned a new title, the Death King. Today, we are covering SSS-Class Revival Hunter Episode 2. Welcome to Otaku Tea Time, where we spill the tea on manga, manhwa, and webtoon stories. If you don't want to read hundreds of chapters, don't worry, I got you. Grab your tea, sit back, and let's get into the story. The impossible had finally happened. For years, the 10th floor had been the wall that stopped everyone. Countless hunters had challenged it. Entire guilds had gathered their strongest members. Some even believed it simply couldn't be cleared with humanity's current strength. Every failed attempt only made the floor's reputation grow. It became known as the first true obstacle inside the tower, the place where talent alone was no longer enough. Then one day, the impossible disappeared. Someone had cleared it, not a guild, not a team of legendary hunters. One person. News spread through Babylon faster than wildfire. Nobody cared what they had been doing. Conversations stopped, restaurants, taverns, guild halls, and hunting grounds all buzzed all the same question. Who was the person that cleared it? The Department of Hunters immediately began collecting every piece of information they could find. Guilds activated their intelligence networks, rumors spread faster than facts. Some claimed this hunter had secretly trained for decades. Others believed an old legendary hunter had returned under a new identity. There were even people convinced that the tower itself had chosen a hidden champion. The funny part? Nobody guessed the truth. Kim Gong-ja was still officially an F-rank hunter. His records were practically empty. Until recently, nobody had even bothered remembering his name. Now, the entire city wanted to know who he was. Gongja couldn't help finding the situation a little ironic. Just days ago, people looked straight through him as if he didn't exist. Now, the most influential organizations inside Babylon were desperately trying to learn everything about him. It really proved one thing. People only noticed you after success. Nobody ever asked about the thousands of failures that came before it. Unlike everyone else, Gongjo wasn't interested in enjoying the attention. In fact, the fame made him uncomfortable. He knew something the rest of Babylon didn't. This wasn't the beginning of his victory. It was simply another step. There were still nearly 90 floors waiting above him. If he became distracted now, all his sacrifices would mean nothing. Instead of celebrating, he began planning. His greatest weapon had never been his skills. It was his memories.
He had lived through 11 years of future history. He knew which guilds would rise, which hunters would become legends, which people deserved trust, and which one absolutely didn't. That future knowledge was worth more than any treasures inside the tower. He wasn't planning to waste it. While Gongja quietly organized his next moves, Babylon's biggest guilds had already begun making theirs. One after another, meetings were called behind closed doors. The first to react was the Black Dragon Guild. Their guild master, Anastasia Zelenska, better known as the Black Witch, listened as reports about the mysterious Death King piled onto her desk. Every report ended the same way: identity unknown, background unknown, method unknown. Only one fact remained certain: someone had achieved what every major guild had failed to accomplish. For Anastasia, that wasn't just impressive, it was dangerous. A hunter capable of clearing the 10th floor alone could completely shift the balance of power inside Babylon. Whether that person becomes an ally or an enemy would shape the future. The Merchant Association reached a similar conclusion. Unlike combat guilds, they measured strength differently. Power created influence, influence created business, business created wealth, and wealth controlled nearly everything inside the tower. To them, the Death King wasn't simply another hunter, he was an investment. Other guilds quickly reached the same conclusion. Some wanted to recruit him, some wanted to investigate him. A few quietly discussed eliminating him before he became even stronger. Inside Babylon, powers always attracted admiration, but it also attracted fear. Gongja already expected all of these. He had watched it happen once before. The only difference was, last time, everyone chased after the future Flame Emperor. Now, they were chasing him. Fortunately, Gongja had no intention of letting anyone decide his future. He had watched too many hunters become prisoners of their own guilds. Some spent years climbing the tower only because contracts forced them to. Others became political tools instead of hunters. That wasn't the life he wanted. He wasn't interested in becoming someone's weapon. If he joined anyone, it would be because it benefited him, not the other way around. More importantly, he already knew exactly where he needed to go next. It wasn't another hunting ground. It wasn't another guild headquarters. It wasn't even the 11th floor. Before challenging higher floors, he needed to build the foundation that would keep him alive. Strength alone wouldn't be enough. He needed money, connections, reliable allies, and people whose talents hadn't yet been recognized by the rest of the world. Because Gongja knew is something history had already taught him. Sometimes the greatest treasures weren't hidden inside dungeons. Sometimes they were ordinary people that everyone else overlooked. And one of those people was about to change his future forever. Gongja understood something that most hunters never did. Clearing one floor didn't make you invincible. It simply made you a target. The higher you climbed, the more people wanted something from you. Some wanted your strength, others wanted your reputation, and a few simply wanted you gone before you became too powerful. If he wanted to survive the tower, he needed to make his next moves carefully. The first thing he needed wasn't another weapon. It wasn't another skill. It was influence. Inside Babylon, influence could be just as valuable as strength, as there was one organization that controlled almost everything flowing through the city: the Merchant Association. Unlike the combat guilds, the Merchant Association didn't compete over who could slay the strongest creatures or monsters. They controlled the economy. Every valuable item found inside the tower eventually passed through them: weapons, armor, potions, monster materials. Even information had a price. If something could be bought, chances were the Merchant Association was making money from it. At the center of that organization was one of Babylon's most influential figures, the Countess. She wasn't famous because she could overpower monsters. She was famous because she possessed an incredibly rare skill that allowed her to trade items between the tower and the outside world. It is an ability nobody else possessed. That single skill turned the Merchant Association into an economic powerhouse. Every guild depended on them in one way or another. Most hunters saw merchants as people who stayed safely behind the front lines. Gongja knew better. Money decided who received the best equipment. Money decided who recovered faster after raids. Money decided which guilds expanded and which disappeared. Ignoring the merchant association would be one of the biggest mistakes a hunter could make. As Gongja entered the association's headquarters, the atmosphere was very different from the noisy guild halls scattered around Babylon. Everything looked refined, clean, orderly. Employees moved with purpose. Every customer was treated with courtesy. It felt less like entering a hunter's headquarters and more like walking into a prestigious bank. A receptionist greeted Gongja as he entered the merchant association. Unlike most hunters visiting the building, he wasn't there to buy equipment or sell monster materials. He had come for one reason: to claim a winning lottery ticket. Thanks to his memories from the future, Gongja already knew the winning numbers before the drawing ever took place. Instead of spending his new life chasing quick profits over and over again, he only needed to win once. That would give him enough capital to begin preparing for everything that lay ahead. The receptionist carefully examined the ticket. At first, her expression remained calm. Then her eyes widened. She immediately excused herself and hurried into another room. Only a few moments later, another man appeared. He introduced himself as Arthur Taylor, better known throughout the Merchant Association as the caretaker of gold. Arthur personally handled the association's highest value clients. Anyone claiming a prize this large automatically became his responsibility. Arthur congratulated Gongja on winning first prize and politely invited him upstairs. As they walked through the building, Gongja noticed the surroundings becoming quieter and far more luxurious. Public offices gave way to private reception rooms. Simple decorations became expensive work of art. Everything about the upper floors reflected one simple truth: inside Babylon, money opened doors. Arthur eventually stopped in front of an elegant reception room. Resting on a large table were stacks upon stacks of gold coins. The prize for first place in the Merchant Association lottery, 53,000 gold. Even after knowing exactly what awaited him, seeing that much wealth gathered in one place was still breathtaking. For a brief moment, Gongja imagined what an ordinary hunter could do with that kind of money: a better home, the finest equipment, years of comfortable living without worrying about expenses. It was enough to completely change someone's life. But Gongja hadn't come to live comfortably. He came here to prepare for the future. Money wasn't the goal. It was simply another tool. Arthur patiently explained his options. Gongja could withdraw the entire reward immediately, or he could safely leave it under the Merchant Association's protection. Most hunters preferred carrying their wealth themselves, but Gongja already knew better. Walking around Babylon with that much gold was practically asking to be robbed. Without hesitation, he chose to leave the money in the association's vault. Arthur smiled. It was a decision he had hoped Gongja would make. But Gongja wasn't finished. There was something else he wanted, something far more valuable than simply protecting his reward. "I'd like to purchase honorary membership." Arthur blinked, not because the request was strange, but because Gongja asked for one of the higher membership tiers immediately. Most hunters slowly earned status over several years. Gongja skipped straight to the second tier membership. It wasn't cheap. The fee alone cost 10,000 gold. Many hunters would have called it a waste. Gong-ja called it an investment. Membership came with privileges that couldn't easily be measured in gold: safer housing, business protection, exclusive trading opportunities, priority access to certain goods, and perhaps more importantly, political backing. Anyone who targeted Gongja would also have to consider the Merchant Association's response. That alone made the price worthwhile. Arthur quickly arranged the paperwork. Then he asked if Gongja belonged to another guild. Gongja simply smiled and said no. At least, not yet. Several guilds would undoubtedly approach him soon: the Black Dragon Guild, the Holy Knights, countless others. But Gongja wasn't interested in rushing that decision. He preferred staying independent while he built his foundation. Freedom was worth more than a flashy guild emblem. Before leaving, Gongja made one final request. If reporters came asking about the Death King, Arthur was free to confirm that Gongja had become an honorary member of the Merchant Association, but he wanted everything else kept private. No unnecessary details, no personal information, no interviews. Arthur understood immediately. He agreed without hesitation. The Merchant Association valued discretion. Protecting important clients wasn't simply good manners, it was good business. As Gongja stepped back outside, he finally allowed himself a small smile. Everything was moving exactly as he wanted. He now had money, protection, and the freedom to prepare for the future without constantly watching his back. Most hunters would have celebrated. Gongja was already thinking about his next investment. Because among all the famous hunters he remembered from the future, one person stood out more than anyone else. At this moment, she was a complete nobody. Her shop was failing. Her inventions went unnoticed. People thought she was wasting her talent. But Gongja already knew the truth. One day, she would become the greatest alchemist in the entire tower. And before anyone else discovered her genius, he intended to become her very first believer. Gongja had no intention of spending his newfound fortune on expensive weapons or flashy armor. Those things could always be replaced. What couldn't easily be replaced was talent, especially the kind of talent that the rest of the world failed to recognize. He had seen it happen countless times during his previous life. People laughed at geniuses before the world learned their names. By the time everyone finally realized their worth, it was already too late. The strongest guilds would compete to recruit them. Their inventions would become priceless, and getting even a few minutes of their time would be nearly impossible. One of those people was living in Babylon right now, unknown, ignored, barely making enough money to survive. Yet in the future, she would become one of the most important people in the entire tower. As Gongja walked through the city, the buildings gradually became older. The clean streets around the Merchant Association disappeared. The further he went, the more neglected the neighborhood became. Most hunters rarely come here. There wasn't much worth seeing. Gongja made his way to one of Babylon's poorest districts in search of a talented alchemist. The workshop he found was nothing like he remembered from the future. It was old, run down, and on the verge of closing. The owner had fallen so far behind on rent that workers were already carrying away her equipment, while the landlord prepared to shut the business down for good. Most people simply walked past without giving her a second glance, believing she was just another failed pharmacist who had chased an impossible dream. But Gongja knew something they didn't. Although she was an unknown alchemist today, he remembered exactly who she would become in the future. Years from now, she would stand at the very top of Alchemy Castle, creating potions so valuable that every major guild in Babylon would compete for her services. The woman everyone ignored today would eventually become one of the greatest alchemists in the entire tower. Rather than waiting for the rest of the world to discover her talent, Gongja decided to become the first person to believe in her. Using the money he had won from the Merchant Association lottery, he placed a massive commission worth 20,000 gold and even offered to pay for new equipment so she could create the potions under the best possible conditions. To most people, it looked like a crazy amount of money to spend on an unknown pharmacist. To Gongja, it was one of the smartest investments he could make. Even the Sword King's ghost questioned whether Gongja was putting too much faith in someone with no reputation. But after watching the young alchemist examine the complicated recipe, his doubts quickly disappeared. She immediately recognized the fury behind the formula, identified the delicate brewing process, and understood details that only someone with extraordinary talent could notice. At that moment, even the Sword King had to admit that Gongja had found a genuine genius. Encouraged by the trust Gongja had shown her, the young alchemist accepted the commission and promised to finish the miracle potions within 4 days. Without realizing it, Gongja had already begun changing another person's future. Long before Babylon recognized her brilliance, he had earned the trust of one of the tower's future legends. While the alchemist focused on brewing the miracle potions, Gongja devoted every day to training under the Sword King's guidance. The old master had no interest in teaching spectacular sword techniques or secret martial arts. Instead, he focused on the fundamentals that every great warrior needed. Gongja's days were filled with endless running, physical conditioning, balance training, and repeating the same sword movements until they became second nature. Every morning began before sunrise, and every evening ended with his body completely exhausted. To an outsider, the training probably looked simple, but the Sword King believed that flashy techniques meant nothing without a solid foundation. Before Gongja could become a master swordsman, he first had to learn how to move efficiently, conserve his strength, and make every action count. As the days passed, Gongja slowly began understanding what his teacher was trying to accomplish. One lesson stood out more than any other. The Sword King explained that Gongja's greatest strength wasn't his reincarnation skill at all. It was the fact that after dying more than 4,000 times, he no longer feared death itself. Most warriors hesitated because they were afraid of making fatal mistake. Gongja didn't carry that hesitation anymore. According to the Sword King, countless swordsmen spent their entire lives trying to overcome their fear of death. Gongja had already done it through sheer experience. Rather than viewing those thousands of deaths as madness, the Sword King taught him how to turn them into one of his greatest advantages. For the first time, Gongja realized that endless cycle of dying hadn't only changed history, it had changed him. 4 days later, Gongja returned to the workshop to collect the miracle potions. The young alchemist had successfully completed every bottle despite the recipe's incredible difficulty. Even the Sword King admitted that very few alchemists could have brewed such a complicated formula so perfectly. The potions themselves looked ordinary, but their true purpose wasn't to increase Gongja's strength overnight. Instead, they would speed up one of the hardest parts of a hunter's training, learning to sense aura. Before Gongja left, the young alchemist thanked him for believing in her when no one else would. That trust became the foundation of a partnership that would continue to grow throughout their journey up the tower. Without wasting any time, Gongja drank the first miracle potion. The effects were immediate. A violent pain spread through his entire body as though every nerve had suddenly caught fire. His heart pounded crazily. His muscles trembled, and even standing became difficult. For a moment, it felt like medicine and more like poison. The Sword King quickly explained that nothing was wrong. The potion wasn't damaging Gongja's body. It was forcing him to experience something that most hunters spent years trying to achieve naturally: aura. Every awakened hunter possessed aura, but very few learned to recognize or control it. Most trained for years through meditation and combat before sensing even the smallest trace of it. The miracle potion accelerated that process by forcing Gongja's body to become aware of the energy that had always existed inside him. The shortcut came at a painful cost, but it allowed Gongja to accomplish in days what normally required years. The Sword King refused to let Gongja rest. Instead, he immediately pushed him into real combat so he could learn to control aura under pressure. At first, the results were frustrating. Gongja could clearly see every attack coming, yet his body couldn't react quickly enough to avoid them. His eyes had improved, but his movements hadn't caught up. Again and again, the Sword King forced him to repeat the same exercises while learning to guide the flow of aura through his body. Little by little, Gongja began to understand the feeling. The warm current of aura that had once been impossible to notice slowly became clearer with every battle. Eventually, he managed to direct that energy into his movements, allowing his body to react faster than before. His first successful use of aura only lasted for a brief moment, but it was enough to dodge an attack that would have struck him only days earlier. It wasn't mastery, it wasn't even close, but it was the first real step toward becoming a true swordsman instead of someone who had relied solely on reincarnation. As the weeks passed, Gongja settled into a new routine. Every morning began under the Sword King's relentless training, while the rest of his days was spent fighting monsters and applying everything he had learned in real combat. Little by little, the miracle potions did exactly what they were meant to do. Each bottle helped Gongja become more aware of the aura flowing throughout his body, allowing him to improve far faster than an ordinary hunter ever could. And with each passing day, Gongja could feel the results. His movement became smoother, his reaction became sharper, and controlling aura slowly became more natural. Gongja's own preparations were finally coming together. He had secured the Merchant Association's protection, discovered the future greatest alchemist before anyone else, begun training under the legendary Sword King, and taken his first real steps toward mastering aura. Even so, he knew this was only the beginning. The tower wasn't something a person conquered in weeks or even months. Every floor introduced stronger monsters, harsher trials, and hunters who had spent decades climbing towards the top. But unlike everyone else, Gongja wasn't climbing blindly. He carried the memories of a future that no longer existed, and every decision he made was creating a brand new history. Then, just as another day of training came to an end, a familiar notification echoed throughout Babylon. Every hunter stopped what they were doing. The tower had issued its next challenge. The 11th floor had officially opened. Gongja slowly looked up at the massive tower stretching into the sky. Everything he had accomplished so far, winning the lottery, finding the future greatest alchemist, training under the Sword King, learning the basic use of aura. It had all been preparation. The real climb was finally about to begin. Now let's spill some extra tea on why this episode is such an important turning point. At first, it might feel like not much happened because there wasn't a huge boss fight or an earth shattering battle. But this is actually one of the most important episodes in Gongja's entire journey. Up until now, Gongja has been relying almost entirely on his reincarnation skill. Yes, it was a broken ability, but even Gongja realized that dying over and over wasn't a sustainable way to become stronger. Eventually, he would face enemies where knowledge alone wouldn't be enough. That's why the Sword King's training matters so much. He isn't teaching Gongja flashy techniques. He's teaching him the fundamentals that every truly great warrior needs. Those lessons would become the backbone of Gongja's fighting style for the rest of the series. This episode also introduces two relationships that shape Gongja's future. The first is the Sword King, whose guidance transforms him from someone who survives through trial and error into someone who can stand on his own skill. The second is with the young alchemist, While everyone else overlooks her, Gongja sees the legend she'll one day become, and by believing in her early, he gains one of the most loyal and talented allies he'll ever have. One thing I really love about SSS Class Revival Hunter is that Gongja doesn't just use his knowledge of the future to make himself stronger. He uses it to lift up people who deserve a chance before the rest of the world notices them. That makes his journey feel very different from most regression stories. And this is only the beginning, because next time, the Death King finally steps beyond the impossible 10th floor, and the 11th floor will test everything he's been preparing for. That's all for today. Thank you for watching. Bye!
If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more manga, manhwa, and webtoon summaries. And I'll see you next time for more Otaku Tea Time. Bye!